Today's video will look at a scenario in which the strongest nation in each continent goes up against the world, which is us, the United States and North America, Brazil and South America. In Europe, we get Russia. In Asia, we get China. In Oceania, we get Australia. And in Africa, we get Egypt. Yes, Egypt's in a great position. What the red team plans to do is take over North and South America and then start moving troops into China, which should be able to secure some lands. So let's start with the North American front. And within a matter of days, they managed to take all the major cities in Canada. Well, besides one. But like the last time, that land pretty much comes the same. Yes, a revolt. And at this point, the world starts sending forces in. At this point, they've secured most of it. And then in the Caribbean, they just take island after island, hopping island after island, taking all of them. And then in the Mexico front, they quickly move in, seizing all of Baja California, Baja. And then they take the area, the 3 states south of the Rio Grande in Mexico, followed by taking Sonora and the state next to it. And then they land in the Yucatan Peninsula. Now Brazil, yeah, they have a busy job, with them quickly taking over Uruguay and moving into Argentina, quickly taking Buenos Aires. And then they move into Colombia towards Bogota, and they move into Venezuela. And they also take over the Guiana nations. Then they start moving into Paraguay, taking most of it over, and the panhandle of Argentina. And then as this is going, they start moving into Bolivia. And then quickly occupying significant lands, and they move in with an attempt to get to Lima. They fail to get there, but they manage to take a nice chunk of land and connect the fronts up, with some American forces landing in Venezuela and Guyana. And quickly, this is what the front looks like. Now let's go to the Oceania front. New Zealand falls to Australia pretty fast. And then Australia starts island hopping from island to island. And they land in Papua New Guinea. They get slowed down about here. But on the plus side, they occupy most of it. And with this, China launches an invasion into the Korean Peninsula, quickly taking it over before Japanese troops can land. Then they take over Taiwan. Within Mongolia, they quickly take it over. And then Mongolia collapses. But in Europe, Russia's not having fun. Yes, let's check out what happened to Russia. As Europe is starting to mobilize its armies, they quickly kick them out of all occupied territories across Europe and, I guess, Asia. And they take these lands over, and Finland cuts off this area, taking all of this over. Yes, they're not having fun. Well, the lands they had occupied for a long time are taken back under the control of the proper nations, with Egypt making 2 plans to hold the front, and they withdraw to the Suez Canal to hold till North American forces can arrive, with India and China in a stalemate at this point, and China's starting to move more troops to that front. Let's go back to North America, where they finally connect up. They finally connect to Alaska, and they occupy these lands. And they start taking this area, Newfoundland, just to make it harder for supplies to get out. With Greenland being a bit harder to get to, so they continue in Canada. With them moving through Mexico and taking over Mexico City, at this point, Mexico crumbles, and its resistance starts falling. While not as effective, because there's still troops stationed in Canada, still fighting. They managed to take more of Bolivia over. Well, they then managed to get a corridor to the Pacific, which they launch an offensive towards Ecuador, which they quickly break through and then take Quito, because Colombia is now dealing with a southern advance. And America lands on the Suez Canal and moves up north. At this point, we can see they're starting to take lands over, with China managing to launch an incursion into India, the Kashmir, on India and Pakistan, and they also launch an offensive here. And this means they're taking more lands. With from the south, the front starts moving. In Kazakhstan and Ukrainian troops link together, and with them linking, they manage to take over this region of Russia. With Russia holding pretty well, but not perfectly. With China launching an offensive into Kazakhstan. And it goes really well. With them taking over all the way to here. With Kazakhstan now realizing they can't keep troops stationed over there. China managing to take some lands from Nepal and Bhutan, and this becomes the front line. With Australia continuing their offensive. And they ask for Chinese assistance, which would basically mean invade the Philippines. With them starting to invade the Philippines and taking over a lot of it. With the Philippines being caught off guard. Because Australian troops have already landed there despite not occupying the ocean well. And well, the front starts to slow down. With Egypt, with a breakthrough by Algerian and Moroccan forces from Libya front, and they move this way. And another breakthrough in the south. This becoming the front line there, with the US and Brazil line to finish up here quicker. And as they cross and link with these forces, and at this point Bogota falls. After Bogota's fall, they move in to take Caracas in Venezuela, and after this, they collapse Venezuela, which makes this a lot easier for Brazil because they have less countries to fight. And at this point, they manage to move and take Lima. And with this, what's left of Bolivia falls. In this area, Chile falls. With Brazil having breakthrough after breakthrough, which is terrifying. As they move down and take Santiago, that means South America is now basically over. And while that's happening, a big encirclement in Canada happens. And with this, it falls. And them starting to advance faster. With them realizing the only way they can do this is if they land in Greenland, which is what they do. And the fight breaks out with British and French forces, which they succeed in and achieve a victory. With it making it harder to supply Canada, a lot of forces start withdrawing before it becomes too cold to escape. With Canada collapsing because they were being held for a while because they completely already collapsed. With Greenland collapsing, and with this, Iceland manages to collapse. And with this, all these forces go to this front in southern South America, which they take it over. Which is a big deal, because that means their forces are now landing in Asia. With Egypt not being able to hold all this pressure. They collapse, and after the collapse, this is a big deal, because now more forces are moving through in this front. With American forces mostly going into at this point, the first ones to get here go to the front and against Indonesia. And they take over big chunks of this island, parts of Malaysia, and all of Brunei. As they move into southern Malaysia, with China starting to move more forces into this front, which leads to the fall of Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, which was fast because they were fighting two fronts. With American forces in Southeast Asia starting to cross to invade Bangladesh. And as they move through, this becomes the front. With China moving some forces to the European front now that there's American forces in this front. With America raising a small army to land in Ireland so that they can station some forces there, which Britain fails to retake, and now they're occupied by America and Europe. It wasn't even a big army. Okay, I changed the color of the front line. Occupation. Not a big deal. Now we got the front line fixed. With Russia managing to send some forces into Kazakhstan, knowing this would create a bit of a detour, with them getting access to the Caspian Sea again. With this becoming the front, with Russia managing to push European forces back a bit more. But the world is heading to a stalemate, with Russia losing St. Petersburg and starting to fall again. This time, they actually do fall back, with American forces moving into the Russian lands as they push back and retake Moscow and manage to hold. But with places like India managing to push forces back, not India, Iran, and Afghanistan and Pakistan, with China getting pushed back out of these lands, with them thinking that would slow down their offensive in this direction, but instead they continue. With them taking more land across the border, more forces advance, with India losing most of its territory. At this point, it starts becoming more of a stalemate, with Japan ending up losing 2 and 3 islands, and then they start collapsing. With so many forces entering, they had no chance. With India in trouble, with India being overwhelmed. But with them managing to somehow keep advancing in Russia. With Russia collapsing, and then becoming an occupation by the Red forces, as they become pretty much a puppet. Now, this happening, they basically become unable to do anything. And so I'm deciding an invasion of Europe would be good. And if I'm moving in, and then getting stuck at the Pyrenees Mountains. So then they go into Morocco, and again they get stuck at mountains. And then they land in the Middle East. And while they get very far, they just manage to take this. And then they start advancing across here. Now, if these nations decide to give up, with them landing in Eritrea and Djibouti and taking some lands. But really, they use this front to liberate the nation there. But they become a puppet too. with the Middle East not liking this as they take over these lands. With them going into negotiations with the world forces. With them agreeing to withdraw from Morocco, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, these areas. Syria, yeah. In exchange for this. With them using stuff as bargaining chips. And at this point, they managed to gain peace, but in one thing they have to return these lands to the world empire. While they won this, they claim victory after this, with them having conquered everywhere and kept all their nations alive. Yes, it ended up in a stalemate, and then they all gave peace. So that's all for today's video. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Wild Mapper out, but not until you subscribe. Bye, guys!